Okay, well, I will introduce myself now. I'll just say hi, Joyce, Beta, nice to meet you, Christina. Um, my name's Chandler, and I am the founder and managing director of 360 Social Impact Studios. We're a nonprofit social impact um, venture studio and an innovation management consulting firm that works at the intersection of global north and global south, and are really focused on supporting underrepresented founders. Very excited to have you, Michael. Thank you for joining us today and to giving us some of your time. And I know Michael through a colleague here. He's based in kind of U.S. and Brazil, and has a fascinating topic that I'm really looking forward to hearing about myself. Um, and we will be, oh, we're recording this, so that's wonderful. So we'll be able to share this out as we get started. But Michael, I feel like I wouldn't give you a proper introduction, so I would love for you, let's just take like a second here, and then I'm going to spotlight you, and we can record this, and there we go, if you don't mind. Okay.
Great. Well, I actually, in my presentation, I have a little intro. So I don't want to repeat it, but when we slap on the deck, I can do a quick,
We're getting it up
a little
right
quick
now.
intro. Good. Fantastic. Great. Well, ready to rock and roll. And thank you, Chandler, for the opportunity to kick off your regular event here. And the topic that I'm going to try to address adroitly is using artificial intelligence to accelerate technology commercialization from a university to the startup phase. I want to be really clear up front. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an engineer. I have mostly been on, in my career, the business side. I have managed scientists. I have managed engineers, but I'm not one. And I'm not an AI specialist either. But I am intrigued certainly by the use and application of AI to a whole range of things. And with GenIP, which actually I had been working for quite some time, and its predecessor company, Tech Capital, in the AI space, I think they're working in a particularly unique niche that I will try to talk about today and hopefully clarify the opportunity for you. So if we can go to the next slide. So just a little bit of where I'm from. So I'm a New Yorker originally, but live with my wife in two different parts of the world. So Chicago is home for part of the year, and Rio de Janeiro is home for the other part of the year. And I'm actually heading back to Chicago on Monday. I can tell you, Rio is a wonderful place to be in January, December, January, and even parts of February, because you don't want to be in Chicago in those months. And so I'm glad to be able, with my wife, to be able to share two homes in two different locations. They're both are great cities, each have their attraction points. And although we have this home here in Rio, we do spend a lot of time in Sao Paulo. And Sao Paulo, as the old expression is, the people of Sao Paulo work so that the people in Rio can play. So Sao Paulo is the real workhorse of Brazil, and I think 40% of the GDP of not only the country, but of South America is the state of Sao Paulo. So Sao Paulo is a real work engine. And Chandler and I were just a few weeks ago together in Campinas, which is the second most important city in the state of Sao Paulo. And it is like a small Sao Paulo. It's a real energizer city. You just get this great sense of energy. So between the city of Sao Paulo and the city of Campinas, you see a lot of activity. And there are more cities in the state of Sao Paulo too. But anyway, Rio is kind of the center of oil and gas industry in Brazil, and that has been traditionally kind of the economic strength. And Petrobras, which is the Brazilian oil company, the Aramco of Brazil, is located here, and they've got an amazing R&D center out here as well. Okay, if we can jump to the next slide, which is actually my intro slide. A little bit about who I am. And I call this the long and winding road, perhaps after my favorite band, the Beatles and George Harrison. The kind of three phases, if I could divide my career into three buckets. One would be my international career with big pharmaceutical companies, which included Pfizer, Bristol Myers, Monsanto, which was the parent company of GD Searle, the pharmaceutical company, and I was in both the Monsanto side and the Searle side, and 20 years working in 55 countries and living in 9 countries. The next phase got me into the startup world, and I spent 12 years doing university biotechnology startups and spinouts, both in Europe and the United States. So one of those companies was based in Madrid, Spain, and Cambridge, Boston. And I went back and forth, lived in Madrid, but going back and forth to Cambridge. And then did spinouts out of MIT, University of Wisconsin, University of Illinois, and other universities. So I know the university spinout world and licensing technology well. The last segment has been by accident. I fell into the real estate side of biotechnology, joining a Fortune 500 real estate developer that had a division that built science parks together with research universities, as well as building incubators. And they had already built the park at MIT. I was one of their first tenants. That's how I got to know them at MIT. And they took basically an industrial slum, if you can believe that, in Cambridge, Boston, an industrial slum that was owned by MIT, and they converted that into 27 acres of about 200,000 square meters of lab buildings and another 150,000 square meters of residential, hotel, and retail. And they created a whole community in 27 acres. That property was so successful that they sold it about 3 or 4 years ago for $3.9 billion. So building a science park with a long-term vision can be very successful. And they joint ventured with MIT in that. When I joined them, the MIT park was already in motion. As I said before, I had been a tenant there, one of their first, but I helped them build a science park at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, where I commuted to 10 years to Baltimore, to another science park in Chicago with Northwestern University, another one at University of Colorado School of Medicine in Denver, and then the one that I actually manage, my day job, the one that I actually manage, and also in Chicago, Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science. But I've involved in developing science parks in Los Angeles with UCLA, in Philadelphia with Jefferson Hospital. I've seen science parks and looked at possibilities in Toronto, Miami, Atlanta, Barcelona, India, and London. I've visited science parks all over Asia, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Western Europe. So I know the science park community well. I put up here, just so that you can see, 2 other tangential activities that I'm involved in. So I'm in the board of directors of the University of Haifa, which is an Israeli university in northern Israel. Interestingly, it's a cool university because very actually close to the Lebanon border. It's the only university. So Haifa has a very strong Arab community. 40% of the 20,000+ students are Arabs. And the Arab community and the Israeli community get along very well in Haifa. And it's the only university in Israel that has an Arab-Israeli cultural institute to kind of ameliorate any cultural differences. Interesting, that same university also has the West Point of Israel, so it trains all of the senior leadership for the Israeli Defense Forces, which is basically their army. And then Osvaldo Cruz Alemão is the German hospital, #3 hospital in Brazil, and ranked by Newsweek's 2025 list of best hospitals in the world, ranked 115th. It's in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And I'm also on their board, and I am having a lot of fun there. We're in the midst of doing a 10-year strategic plan with the American consulting group Bain. And that's been a lot of fun, because trying to project what healthcare in Brazil is going to be like 10 years from now is no easy task. So these are just some of the activities that I've been involved in. Sorry if I've given you a long diatribe here, but just give you a little bit of smattering of my long and winding road. I was going to put some electric guitars in here because that's my hobby, and amps, but I decided that's going a little bit too far. But anyway, so next slide, please. So I figured I'd start out with a chart from Autumn. So Autumn is the American Association of Technology Managers. Autumn basically aggregates data from universities around the United States on the whole field of academic tech transfer. Unfortunately, these results are from 2022. The 2024 results are not out yet, but I think they're important to get a feel for the impact of academic research commercialization in the US market. And there's a lot of good data here, and I'll go over just some of the key things. So first of all, the academic enterprises in the United States spend $92 billion in research, which is a huge amount of money. Think that the NIH budget before Trump starts cutting was $48 billion a year. So if you put all of academia in the United States, it's almost double the NIH, which is quite a large budget. And, basically there are 24,000 invention disclosures by these universities each year. There are 16,857 new patent applications, which is mind-boggling. Even though that is an incredible number, China is kind of doubling that number now. So China, which had been way far behind, is actually kind of aggressively pursuing a patent strategy, and has probably doubled that number these days. And you can see here that almost 8,000 US patents were issued in 2022. We see that just under 10,000 licenses and option agreements were executed by these universities. 850 new products were created. Now we get to the key point here, startups. So 998 startups were started in 2022 from academic sources. And interestingly enough, if you look at all the academic startups that have happened kind of since this autumn started charting this, which has been maybe the last 10 or 15 years, you can see that there are still 6,800 startups still operational as of 2022. Now, obviously we don't know, and that covers the COVID period of time, which is kind of, remember COVID was 20, 21, 22, and for startups to continue to survive COVID was no easy task. So you can see, it's an impressive activity going on in the US academic realm. And there are other countries that are equally active within their constraints of their own economy. So let's go to the next slide. I thought this is also an autumn-based chart. And so this is the revenue from licensing of technology coming from the leading universities that license technology. And as you can see, this data, obviously this is one data point from 1 year, but Northwestern University was bringing in, just under 200 million a year, followed by University of California System followed by Columbia University, followed by NYU, and then followed by Princeton. I can tell you in the case of Chicago, one drug that was licensed to Pfizer actually brought in for revenue for Northwestern $1 billion over about 10 years of time. So licensing revenue can be an incredible source of non-traditional revenue. Most universities, when they think of revenue, they think of tuition, and they think of grant money coming through, et cetera, et cetera. But this is non-traditional revenue that's coming in through licensing of technology. So it can be a lot. Now, these are the best, obviously. Other universities may have much lower numbers. If we can go to the next slide. So this is the top 15 colleges in the United States that created the most startups and how much capital they raised, and then the startup founders per 1,000 students. I know that's a big mouthful there. So if you look all the way on the left, you can see the top 15 universities in terms of particularly the undergraduate area, not even the graduate area, and the amount of capital raised, which is astonishing. So MIT 46 billion, Stanford 74 billion, Harvard 50 billion, et cetera, and right on down the line. Even Babson College in Boston, which is a relatively small school, startups raised $4 billion. So as they say, not too shabby. Then you look at, obviously, on the right-hand side of this chart, and you'll see kind of the startups per 1,000 students. And you can see at the bottom 0, 10, 20, 30. It's just an indication of kind of what the culture for startups are in some universities. And there are probably other universities not mentioned here that are equally prolific. Next slide. So when we profile university startups and founders, most university startups start with a brilliant scientist or inventor that is traditionally funded by 2 to 5 year grants. And that brilliant scientist has a great idea that he's probably really excited to publish. And the problem is if he publishes that idea, he kind of screws his patents overseas. So if you publish before you patent. So remember, the old motto in academia is publish or perish, which unfortunately goes against technology commercialization. Because if you publish, the minute you publish, you lose your international rights, and you have 1 year from the time of when you published to file in the US. So you've already kind of screwed your international rights, and you can still get your US rights, but you've got to watch your time there. The problem with this brilliant scientist inventor that's funded by grants is that the mindset on research and development is a 2 to 5 year mindset, because these grants usually go from 2 to 5 years, depending on whether it's NIH, NSF, DOD, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's great for academia. But the business world, as you all know, particularly those companies that are publicly traded on a stock market, work on quarterly results. We're all in the business world geared towards quarterly results. So what does that mean? That means that every quarter, an investor is looking for information milestone achievement in that quarter. And if there's no milestone achievement, then the investor gets really nervous. So what is a milestone, potentially milestone, that would get an investor happy? Well, raising money, number one, filing a new patent, getting a grant from the NIH, filing a new scientific publication, or getting out a new scientific publication in a major journal, hiring on key members of the management team, board of directors, scientific advisory board, signing a deal with a strategic partner that might even take equity. raising money with a venture capital or even angel capital group. All of these are milestones, and investors like to see quarterly results. If they don't see quarterly results, they get nervous about their investment. I can tell you, having run a publicly traded company, I had investors calling me all the time, and I had to be really careful because I couldn't give any privileged information, any forward-looking statements. Otherwise, I could get, fined by the SEC. And so you have to be really careful in talking to investors, but they all want to know what's happening. Should they stay in the stock or not? So again, coming back, most university startups and founders have a brilliant scientist, but with a mindset of 2 to 5 years for development, which doesn't coalesce with the business world. He's got a novel idea. Hopefully he's patented before he published it. If not, he's impaired his patent rights. And then finally, the other issue is he's got early proof of concept data, which what I would call anecdotal. What do we mean by anecdotal? Anecdotal means small numbers that may not be statistically significant here. And so, I licensed some technology from MIT from a brilliant guy, and he had shown that he could deliver insulin orally in mice. And he could give biotech drugs, which are all injectable orally in mice. When we tried to get that into humans, it didn't work. And we spent like $12 million, $15 million on it. And we couldn't get it to work after 5 years of research. And so his data, which was really interesting and was published, was based on a really small amount of what I would call anecdotal early proof of concept data. So this is the typical profile of a university startup and founder. Next slide, please. So why do university startups fail? Well, first and foremost, they don't have a good understanding. They have a great idea, but they don't have a good understanding of what the market is and who the customer is, and understand what the customer is looking for. They don't achieve milestones. They are not really clear on who their competition is and what their advantages against their competition are. The founder can be pretty inflexible. So in my incubator that I have, if I find a founder that is inflexible, I can tell you that this company's not going to go anywhere. Unfortunately, when you have inflexible founders that are not willing to pivot, not willing to go to a plan B or a plan C, then a company is going to most likely fail. Another issue with university startups is the conflict of interest. So often the founder is a full-time faculty member and doing the company on the side. And most universities allow that up to a certain point. But the problem is you get into a conflict of interest, and the universities don't like that. And the founder's got to be really clear on his activity. Another key point is insufficient intellectual property strategy. So there are lots of different types of intellectual property that do not include patents. So for instance, in the realm of drugs, so many, the most common of everything is called a trade secret. So as you know, the Coca-Cola syrup is a trade secret. And Coca-Cola never disclosed that. They never patented because they didn't want anybody to see what the formula was. And that is a trade secret. And still to this day, nobody knows what the Coca-Cola formula is. That is a type of intellectual property. In the drug world, you have also what is called orphan drug designation by the FDA, which gives you a certain number of years of protection. And there are other types of protection besides patents, but patents are the principal strategy. And the issue is not just a US patent, but you have patents for key international markets. And then finally, most startup founders don't have a good idea of the product development, product commercialization process. And if they don't understand that, they won't understand how to get to the marketplace. And that goes back then to the cycle again of lack of market and customer understanding. So next slide. Great. So on the contrary to this, I'm going to contrast this with the ultimate university entrepreneur who was a mentor of mine and is known as the Edison of medicine. Thomas Edison, as you know, was a great inventor of DC electricity, among other things. And this guy is named Bob Langer at MIT. And Bob Langer has over 1,400 patents. He has over 1,600 scientific publications and 450,000 citations from those scientific publications. So he has been cited by more people than anyone else so far. He's done more than 40 biotech startups. I actually did his third startup, which I took public. But more notable than the startup that I did was Moderna, as you know, which had the RNA vaccine that came out during COVID period of time. And then he typically brings in at least $10 million annually in grant funding and has more than 100 researchers under him at his labs at MIT. So interestingly, he's never stepped into a company in a permanent role. He usually takes a role on the scientific advisory board. In my case, he was chairman of our scientific advisory board, but he still maintained his place in MIT and continued to invent, but with a very entrepreneurial mindset. Next slide. So I'd like to get to a core problem here, which is the problem of university technology commercialization. And the negatives are that even the best universities around the world only license less than 13% of their patents. That means that 87% of their patents are not licensed. And they sit on a shelf. So basically, that's a wasting financial asset sitting on a shelf. Next slide, please. So the big question is why? Next slide, please. So three major reasons. So before the patent is even written, before you even decide to write a patent, you really need to do a commercial assessment, pre-patenting of what's the market for this patent, what is the competitive analysis of other technologies that might compete against this patent, and what are other patents in the field that might compete against your patent. So these are three major reasons. Most universities don't look at this before they patent. They just go ahead and patent. They may do a little commercial pre-assessment. They may do a little assessment of the patents in the field. They certainly don't do a full competitive analysis. And that leads to a lot of patents that are garbage, unfortunately, that are not commercializable. So next slide. So another reason is this famous technology readiness level thermometer. So I don't know if you're aware of the TRL, or technology readiness level. And obviously, the lower levels you can see here represent very early research on a technology. As you get into the mid levels of TR level 5 and 6, you get beginnings of more development of a technology, and you're able to demonstrate that the technology works multiple times. And then finally, at technology level 8 and 9, you've got something that's ready to go to the marketplace. But the problem is most university technology levels are at this very low level of technology level, TRL level 1 and 2. And that means that most companies may not get interested in this. But there is a strategy here, and I'll talk about it later. Next slide. Still another reason, no supporting scientific papers. So even though the inventor may be very good, he hasn't written any papers after patenting that are in peer-reviewed journals that support and provide further credibility of the technology. Next slide, please. Another reason, the inventor has already left the institution. So interesting, I'm working here in Brazil with an institution where they have a lot of good patents, a lot of good science, but the problem is a number of their inventors have already left. They've retired. They've gone on to someplace else. So that's not good, because if you get somebody who's interested in the technology, who are they going to talk to about how the technology works? Because that inventor really knew the guts and the brains of the technology, and he's gone. So next slide, please. And then finally is that the remaining patent life may be too short for product development and commercialization. So remember, in the United States, a patent is for 20 years. Sounds like a lot, but remember that to develop a new drug can easily take 14 to 16 years, and that leaves you only 4 to 6 years of actual commercial life for a drug. Not a lot of time to make a huge investment in marketing a new drug. So that issue of the patent life, remaining patent life for a technology also weakens the potential interest in licensing a patent. Next slide. So let's talk about the role of the startup versus licensing to a larger company. So most of the larger companies, when they want to license a technology from a university, are looking at a TRL level that is somewhere between 4 and 9. Now, and that's great. And I've listed all kinds of companies that license in technology. By the way, most pharmaceutical companies today license in 75 to 80% of their products. They only internally develop maybe 20% of their drugs. So 80% is licensed in from a university. And they're looking for later stage technologies. So that's a problem for most universities because they don't have a lot of later stage technologies. So if we could hit the forward button here, because there's a little bit more on this slide. Great. So the strategy is, this is where startups can come in. So really the role of a startup is to take a technology at a very early level, TRL level 1 to 3, and they can play an important role in taking that technology further into maybe up to TRL level 7, and then a handoff to a larger partner. And that's really the gap that startups can play. Most startups are never going to commercialize themselves, their own technology. They'll do a handoff to a larger company, but they play a really important role in taking early stage technology and pushing it forward. So next slide. So some of the challenges for startups. Well, market research is critical, but most startups have very limited funds and talent for this activity. They don't have people on staff that can do the market research, and they can't go out and buy an expensive market research report. They need to make a critical decision on what's the market potential for that technology. What's the competitive landscape, both from a patent and stage of development. Time is money. Everybody thinks that money is the biggest problem of a startup. It's actually time, because as time goes by and nothing is happening, that's the biggest enemy of a startup. So startup needs to move things along, needs to be achieving milestones to increase its valuation for future fundraising. And then finally, a startup needs to be able to show potential investors and partners that they have independent due diligence or appraisal on their technology and intellectual property. And so all of these are some of the major challenges that startups startups face. Next slide, please. So big question, the title of today's presentation, how can artificial intelligence help? Well, obviously it can help through speed, cost, time, and manpower savings. That's a lot of verbiage there. What does that really mean? A typical tech transfer office, when I say TTO, that's tech transfer office, or even a company, their time to produce analysis for one patent may take several weeks or months. And, small companies don't have that amount of time. So how can artificial intelligence help? Next slide, please. So GenIP, a company that I do advising for, full disclosure, I'm not an employee, but I do advise them. This is a British company, has a platform of technology, AI-based technology that can fill this gap, again, of smarter, faster, better. They have a report called Invention Evaluator that provides bespoke research reports that can assess the market potential of a new technology innovation, through an AI software, proprietary AI software. But they also have services which help university tech transfer folks. They have a specific headhunting business that can go out and identify and hire on technology transfer officers that are smart and capable for their organizations in a much faster, cheaper way than traditional headhunters. So 2 different AI services here. Next slide, please. So I won't go through all of this, but Invention Evaluator has already done more than 5,800 reports for 300 research institutions. I can tell you for one organization today that has about 1,400 patent portfolio, we're analyzing 400 of those patents. So the first step is doing an Invention Evaluator report for each of the 400 patents that we're going to be looking. The second step will be prioritizing of those patents from the ones that we think have best commercial value to the ones that have least commercial value. And so they realize that they're not going to be able to commercialize 400 patents, but if they can, identify maybe 10 or 20%, the Pareto law, usually 10 to 20% of something is 80% of the volume of revenue, profits, et cetera, that will help them. And so this is a comprehensive report that's produced within 10 days at a very reasonable price for a not-for-profit or startup organization. It costs $800. For a corporation, it costs $1,000, but you're getting a 40 to 60-page report that gives you an IP evaluation, market evaluation, and identifies all your competition as well as your potential partners. Next slide. And you get basically a quick assessment, very objective insights, very cost-effective solution, proprietary data. You're the only one that's going to see this information. We do a quality control on this with experts in the particular field. And there's a proven track record here on this. So next slide. Very simple step for this. You submit the information about the invention. You don't have to have it patented. We can analyze an existing patent or just an idea. We then have expert evaluators begin to use the system, prepare the report, and then you get the report back within 10 days. So quick, comprehensive 46-page report. Next slide, and it's all encrypted. So the value for this is really important for different audiences. So the first audience would be research institutions and universities. So they get very comprehensive technology assessment of their own portfolio. They get some strategic collaboration alternatives, who they might be able to license this technology to. And they get enhanced decision support for their team because their team may not have the capabilities to do these things this quickly. Next slide. For startups, the value is immense. You quickly get the global market potential. You get the identification of your key competitors and competition, but also potential partners. And you also get an external independent valuation of your technology. Next slide. Venture capital groups also like this because it allows them to look at their portfolio of companies and evaluate the portfolio of companies that they've got and the technologies that they've got. It provides them quick market intelligence and trend analysis, and it's also for them a risk mitigation. Remember, venture capital groups have to return a profit back to their investors, a return on investment to the investors. So this risk mitigation strategy is very important for them. Next slide. And then finally, for large corporations and their corporate business development groups, this helps them. Many large corporations have their internal venture capital as well as venture capital business development groups. This helps them to target their investment opportunities. It's their due diligence. They always like to have an external due diligence when they're looking at something, and it allows them to also evaluate their own portfolio of products. So next slide. These are just a very quick selection of some of our clients. We actually have a number of clients in Brazil, including the Brazilian National Nuclear Energy Center, which has 5 research centers throughout the country and has a several hundred patent portfolio that we've been working on, but also a number of Vale, which is one of the largest Brazilian multinational companies, and PUC, which is the Catholic University in Rio, but also a number of international in both Europe, Australia, US, etc.
And I
Next
have
slide.
to say, Michael, while you're on the slide, I am a alumni of the University of Washington and used to teach for the I-Corps program up in Seattle at the, and so CoMotion, I was so surprised because when we first met, I did not know that that we were connected like that. But I have to say, I also know that UW is one of the largest purchasers of, they purchase a couple hundred of those reports. So it's great to see, and I just want to give a shout out because UW. I also saw UW as the only public university that was on the top 15 for top licensors, or I think that's what it was for earlier.
Yep.
So,
yep. Cool. Thank you, Chandler, for that insight. Great. Next slide. I think I'm almost finishing here. So, the 3 major reasons that I had identified before, actually, again, commercial assessment, pre and post patenting, competitive analysis of other technologies, and analysis of other patents in the field. All of these 3 major issues you can resolve very quickly, very speedily, very cost efficient, and very thoroughly with this AI platform, and at least solve this problem. Next slide. And so I think this is the closing slide. This whole concept of university to startup technology transfer, I think now can be accelerated with this AI platform for evaluating technology to identify the best of ideas, technologies, patents, etc. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that might come up. I'm sorry that I've gone by this very quickly, but happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
No, thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Michael. That I really learned a lot. And I do have a question. Maybe I'll kick it off as we, to encourage some other people here. But one of them, as you've been working with these big universities, how have they integrated? How have they leveraged, outside of just prioritization? Because everybody, a report this, a report that. I'm actually familiar with the GenIP reports, so I know how rich they are. But how are they using it after they get the report?
So that's a great question. So it's very easy when a university, takes on the first 5, let's say, reports, because they've got 5 reports. They can kind of get a quick snapshot of what their technology is. I mean, a university has to make a couple of key decisions. 1, does this technology have licensing potential? And how much? If the answer is yes, that goes in one box. The second question that they have to answer is, the technology is not sufficiently good to be licensable. That goes in another box, the extreme. So basically, at that point, the university should make a decision, terminate the patent activity, give it back to the inventor. I know the university would have spent money on that, but they're going to still have to spend patent fees further as they go along. So it's actually a cost savings. So you have those first 2 buckets. 1, deciding on the best technologies to commercialize. The second is the technologies that are least valuable are not commercializable, and then you just stop that activity. So then the question is, what do you do with everything in the middle? Well, if the technology in the middle is good technology with good market potential, good level of innovation, but very early for in terms of technology readiness level, you think about a startup strategy, and you think of within your university or even outside of university how you can attract startups to get that technology going. So usually with a startup, you're not going to make a lot of money off of a licensing deal. The licensing money is going to be more in the back end, but at least that technology is getting out to the market. The goal, remember, of a startup company is to progress the TRL level to where a larger company is going to take that technology and take it to commercialization level. And then that revenue will flow back, not just through the startup, but back to the university as well.
Yeah. And this is a really great question that Dimitri just put in the chat, and I was thinking the same thing because I was thinking, so I'll read it. How often should an academic startup run a competitive IP analysis, annually and or quarterly? What are your thoughts on that?
So it depends on the industry. So if you're in the software business, as you know, software gets updated anywhere from 2 to 4 times a year. And so you've got to be really up to speed on who your competition is in the software business. If you're in the pharmaceutical world, where the development times for a product, so it has to deal with how often does your new product come out. In the software world, you're bringing out, Apple brings out usually upgrades to each of its product at least once or twice a year. So you've got to be very current on your competitors on a quarterly basis. In the drug space, where it takes 12 to 14 years, I think if you do a yearly analysis of your technology competition, you're doing okay.
Now it's interesting because one of the things that I was thinking to add on to this question. Let's go from an academic startup to an academic accelerator or an academic, an incubator program. What does it look like for them when they get these reports? Because, when thinking about the Vianeo platform that we use, those the market scans are very temporal. Like they're this moment in time, this is what the market scan looks like. But when you're thinking going from the startup portfolio to the academic portfolio, how are they how often are they running this type of competitive analysis? Let's say if they have a portfolio of 200 or 300, like you say.
So again, I think you've got to segregate, Chandler, by type of technology and development time. So I'm going to give you, in the biomedical space, you have 3 types of technology: drugs, which take 12 to 14 years; medical devices, which can take 1 to 2 to 3 years; and then diagnostics, which can take maybe 3 to 4 years if you've got to do some clinical trials. Each of those are different. If you go into, again, the software app space, you need to be current. If you're not current, you're out of business, because in the app business, things are coming up incredibly fast, and you need to be on top of your game of what's going on.
Yeah, and now I mean I can see how it makes sense why having an institution or an organization that can do this level, to have this expertise in the different specialties and verticals, could be a challenge for many universities that don't have this expertise.
Correct. And the other thing is that investors and partners usually want to see an outside independent kind of evaluation. They don't necessarily trust the university evaluation of this, and the university might not even be willing to share their own evaluation, and the university's evaluation may not be as comprehensive quite frankly.
Mhm.
So that's why an independent due diligence document is really valuable for a potential investor or partner. I see someone's hand up.
You
Maybe
raised
I raised my
Travis.
hand. Sorry. In my excitement, I got.
Yeah. I'll remove the spotlight here and see if anybody else has. Feel free. This is an open session to ask any other question you might have. And great question to meet you. Hopefully you got that answer.
Great questions so far. Thank you.
Absolutely. I do have another question, but feel free to put it in the chat and I'll give it another 10-15 seconds to see if anybody wants to ask a question. But so, Michael, my question here, I was just last week reading a article that was published about the number of patents that were produced in Brazil in 2024. And something struck me really interesting. Can guess who was the number one producer of patents in Brazil in 2024? Feel
So
surprised.
I would have, my guess would have been one of two universities, the University of São Paulo or the University of Campinas. But it
Okay.
also could have been the Catholic University in Campinas.
Well, it was actually Stellantis,
Oh, really?
the car company.
Wow.
And they produced more than any public university in Brazil for the first time in the history. And so my just question is how, and I kind of noticed it too. You said a lot of this IP is sitting on the shelf, right? Do you think
Yes.
that do you think that there as a culture that you're seeing researchers moving more towards industry or faster moving industries from academia because they're tired of the time it takes to market with with um with universities and spitting out becoming founders?
Yeah, so remember, so great question. I would say for every 100 researchers you have in a university, you probably have that are entrepreneurial minded, maybe five. So I would say 5% of all researchers have an entrepreneurial bent to want to either start up a company or get involved in some way, shape, or form in a startup. It's not a lot. Now, interestingly enough, some universities like Stanford and MIT have what they call a different tenure track program. So the traditional university tenure track is by public scientific publications and grants.
Mhm.
But MIT and Stanford's tenure track program includes in startups, if you're involved in startups, and if you're in your patenting activity.
Wow, that's really interesting. And kind of just to close out here, maybe before I give you before we just say final thoughts here, how much are the universities spending to maintain these patents?
Imagine.
Yeah.
So, a patent portfolio can cost millions. Imagine if a university has patents of 1,400 patents. Now, the issue, I'll have to tell you, um, a university in Brazil versus a university in the United States is a different cost structure. Patent filing in Brazil is about a tenth of what it is in the United States.
Mhm.
So patent filing in the United States is a lot more. But in the United States, you get a response from the patent office in less than 3 years. In Brazil, it can take you 10 years to get a response from the patent office. So that time is money. I mean, so my strategy that I'm encouraging many places in Latin America, particularly, are to file in the United States or file Europe first, and then you file the patent cooperation treaty back to your country is faster than if you filed the initial patent in your home country.
Yeah. Great
It's more
advice.
expensive, but it saves you a lot of time. It can save you 5 to 7 years.
This has been truly a super informative, and I'm just, I'm just so honored to be able to have you here, Michael, with, with your experience and your time. And I just want to give you one final chance to close out with a final thought.
So a final thought is the world needs university inventions. Universities are our powerhouse, our sun for inventions. And I think our challenge is to enable this flow of great inventions coming from a university to the marketplace. They're brilliant minds in universities. The obstacles that we run are everything that I've identified in the presentation, but I think the challenge is to smooth and enhance that flow of technology coming out of a university to startups, to companies, to benefit healthcare patients, consumers around the world, et cetera.